Let's look at 3 examples of how framing, speech bubbles, characters, and setting can be used to encourage a reader to engage with a story. We'll start with a panel from Jason Lutz's award-winning book, Berlin. His story is set between 1928 and 1933 in Berlin, Germany, and it offers a reader an intimate look at the lives of German citizens during the decline of their long-standing republic. This panel stretches across the full width of a page. It's taking up space that could have potentially been used for another 1 or 2 additional panels. But Mr. Lutz uses a single panel because he gets so much information out of just this one moment. His framing stages the scene in a voyeuristic way. We're standing in front of a window right outside of a house. And it's a house that's been vandalized in more than one way. We see what's likely to be some kind of political propaganda or hate speech scrawled on the outer wall. Mr. Lutz is smart to obscure the words so we don't understand what they are saying, and therefore our attention isn't drawn away from what the main focus of the panel is. So now we look over to the window frame, which works to frame the real story of this panel. We're shown the aftermath of an attack, a ring of broken glass, which creates a tight circle around this domestic setting. A man and woman stand in rigid poses just behind their dining room table, shocked at what's happened. The woman's dismay is further emphasized by the staging of the door frame around her. Notice how she's silhouetted against the black while the man almost disappears in the white curtain. In our next example, we're looking at a panel from Brian Lee O'Malley's book, Scott Pilgrim. It's a comic about an aimless 20-something who finds himself the hero of his own story as he attempts to win the heart of a girl named Ramona Flowers. This is a scene from Scott and Ramona's first time hanging out together. Mr. O'Malley frames his characters in a long shot from across the street. It's too dark for us to see the background, but there's plenty of clues as to where we are. We can see we're in a cold, snowy city, Toronto to be precise, and the ground is cold enough that the road is covered in ice. Snow is falling and creating a calming pattern around the characters. And you'll notice how the edge of the street light beam points right to the characters to draw our attention to them. Scott and Ramona aren't quite walking side by side. Ramona is clearly leading the way, and while Scott's body language doesn't show it, his words let us know that he's a little uncomfortable in the situation. He drags out his wording, "So," and then he follows it up with a question. And that leads him right into another question without waiting for an answer. So clearly he wants to get to know this girl. In this third example, we're looking at a panel by one of the masters of creepy comics, Emily Carroll. Miss Carroll has a less conventional approach to panel design than Lutz and O'Malley. First, we notice her panel doesn't have the usual black-lined frame. She relies on the rough edges of her background color to frame her narrative content. The scene is staged in a way that feels ceremonial, possibly a wedding. Miss Carroll is a storyteller who knows how to keep her stories tense. And that tension comes from various techniques. One is the pacing of her text narrative. Notice the way the narration begins on the left side of the panel and resolves on the right. By breaking the flow with the characters, as the reader, we're naturally drawn to read the statement at a slower pace. The staging of the characters also provides some tension. If you're into horror fiction, you know that one of the rules of horror storytelling is to withhold the big reveals, right? Never show the monster. She's kind of doing that here, meaning she's keeping the characters' faces hidden to create a bit more tension. This panel introduces us to the 3 nameless and faceless characters. There's a girl, there is a man, and then there's the girl's father, who appears only as a glowing red cross floating in the middle of the scene. Miss Carroll also uses her penmanship to set the tone of the story. Her tall, narrow letters feel serious and out of time, a little old-fashioned, maybe Victorian. They're not using a cartoonish font like a lot of comics do. Her text floats like spirits in a room, and it changes its voice by switching to a lowercase script. I want you to notice that the narrative voice of these comics comes in part from the stories the artists are telling. Lute's comic is a period piece, and he uses clear details of setting and clothing and artifacts in the room to help us engage with what would otherwise be an unfamiliar setting. Brian Lee O'Malley's story is set in a contemporary city, so it doesn't need as many details to keep us engaged with the time and place. Emily Carroll's stories are more timeless. They're ghost stories. And by leaving out visual detail, she forces us to derive tone from the textures of her backgrounds and the line work of her art. So next time you're reading a comic, take a moment to just focus in on a single panel. Look at the way the comic artist uses frame and speech bubbles and text, and how they stage their characters and setting, what things they add and what things they also decide to leave out. You can learn a whole lot about a comic artist by the way they engage with just a single panel. That said, next we're going to move right on to that magic that happens when you put two panels next to each other.